Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. I know I've been doing a lot of talking head videos lately, but between me getting sick and I've actually been pretty busy with a few things, I have some really cool videos coming up, a lot of interesting stuff, so bear with me, but I will be going back to my normal style videos very soon. With that said, I do have some great stories for you today, starting with a huge boost. Cheaper prices, Intel's Battlemage GPUs, Nvidia's hurting their own GPUs for money, and AMD will change everything with this. But first, with new CPUs and GPUs coming out, make sure you're ready with Meld Alerts, the completely free sign up that sends you an email when new PC hardware is releasing. Because let's be honest, keeping up with all the new PC hardware releases can be tricky. And don't worry, I'll only tell you important stuff like CPUs, GPUs, etc. Plus I'll send you great deals as those come out as well. That way you won't have to worry when new PC hardware is releasing. So yeah, it's completely free at meldalerts.com and it only takes you a couple seconds. So make sure to check that out below. Okay, it's news time, and first up for today, we have a pretty different story that I thought was really interesting. As you can see right here, AMD's Ryzen 9 7900 GPU was recently overclocked. Now, before I get to it, really quickly, let's check this out. You can see this is the Ryzen 9 7900, and its GPU comes with two CUs clocked at just 2200 megahertz. Well, when we get to the story, we can see some pretty interesting stuff, as the website Scatterbenched overclocked the iGPU to some pretty wild levels. As you can see here, the base voltage of the normal iGPU is 0.997 volts, and it consumes around 38.5 watts. Well, this overclock got the voltage all the way up to 1.395 volts and was able to get a 3.1 gigahertz boost. Remember that it normally only gets 2200 megahertz. So that's a really big boost there. The GPU memory clock was now set to 3200 megahertz, and with the GPU SoC power, it brought it all the way up to 60 watts. So we're talking a pretty big increase from 38.5. But with that, he was actually able to get some pretty impressive increases. When we look here, now really quickly, I want to go ahead and note that while these increases look extremely high, he actually started it at 90%, which just sort of makes it look way higher than what it is. Regardless, as you can see, it did get some pretty big boosts. I mean, we're talking over 30% here, right around a little over 35%, almost 40%. The highest was actually Tomb Raider, getting it up to a whopping 42% higher. So some pretty big performance increase. And in fact, believe it or not, even though obviously this is pretty horrible, but he was actually able to do a tiny bit of ray tracing, which he wasn't able to do before, which is why you see right here that there's nothing blue here, because without overclocking it, it couldn't do anything at all. Regardless, you're still not going to be using this for wild gaming or anything like that. I mean, Tomb Raider at 1080p, it only got 17 FPS, but if you look at CSGO, it got right around 80 FPS. And of course, if you lower it from 1080p to say 720p, it should do fairly well. At the end of the day, I really just think it's interesting to see how well this little iGPU can overclock and how well it can perform. And next up for today, we have an interesting story that shows that GPU prices are in fact, although slowly, but getting cheaper in Europe. First up, we had some recent stories that actually showed that in China, now really quickly, January actually saw a 9% increase in sales of GPUs compared to December, but in a year-over-year look, GPU sales plummeted by 42%. So that's a huge decline. But even with that, when we look at the German retailer Mind Factory, we can actually see that the average price of a graphics card sold in February of this year is at least 93% higher than it was in 2020. So GPU prices still have not come down to where they were just a couple years ago. Though of course, since then we have had two new generations, and as we'd seen a little bit before that, they are going up in price each generation. But with massive declines in sales, we're talking 42% year over year, they almost certainly can't keep this up. And with that in mind, Hardware.info recently released pricing for GPUs in February compared to January. And at least in Europe, it looks like things are getting cheaper. As you can see right here, the 7900 XTX went down by a whopping 14.4%, though it's still slightly above MSRP, The 7900 XT went down 8% and is now firmly below MSRP. The 6950 XT actually went up slightly. The 6900 XT went up slightly, but then quite a bit of these went down to where overall the total difference from January to February actually saw a decrease for AMD GPUs by 5.6%. And we actually saw not as great, but still a decrease of 3% from January to February for Nvidia. Basically, prices are coming down, and while unfortunately they aren't coming down fast, hopefully we can see this trend continue throughout the months moving forward until prices actually get to reasonable levels. And next up for today, I have a really quick story about Intel, who actually discussed their next-gen Battlemage GPUs. As you can see down here, this originally comes from a podcast by PC World, where they spoke with Intel's ARC spokesman, Tom Peterson. And the really interesting part actually happens down here. We can actually see that they state that emphasis was made on better DX12 scaling, better ray tracing capabilities, and even AI. Now, what's interesting about what they state on AI is that they actually went after Nvidia and claimed that they aren't ready to accept Nvidia's AI-driven frame generation technology because they say that it's unwanted for AI to do that kind of work. And this is interesting because we saw something very similar from AMD in my last video, where they sort of went after Nvidia for using AI for all of these things that they don't think they need to. So here it looks like Intel is agreeing with that. And not only that, but he claims, quote, "Obviously, I'm not going to disclose new dates for Battlemage or specs, but I can say that the bulk of our design team, both on the architecture and software side, are working on it, and progress is accelerating and moving along quite quickly." He even states there are some cool new technologies that he wants to talk about, but he can't. But he just said, let's just say Battlemage is our second generation discrete graphics cards, and the bulk of our team is on it. Ultimately, it looks like Intel is very seriously working on their next gen GPUs, and it actually sounds exciting. We're talking new technologies. They're getting very serious about their discrete GPUs. And speaking of discrete GPUs, Nvidia actually just confirmed something that is really annoying. During one of my recent stories, I actually covered the fact that the 4090 beats the new RTX 6000 Ada in content creation. And the reason that was such a big deal is because the 4090 is obviously $1,600, while the RTX 6000 is a whopping $6,800. And of course, that does not sound good for Nvidia. But it looks like we're starting to see some of the things that Nvidia does to likely intentionally hurt the 4090, so you'll want to spend the extra cash. As you can see right here, Nvidia recently confirmed that their GeForce cards lack peer-to-peer. For those who don't know, peer-to-peer is effectively functionality where the GPUs are able to talk to one another without system memory. Instead, they just use their VRAM. And this makes for some pretty big performance increases, especially, as they say, when you're working with CUDA programs. As you can see right here, Puget Systems recently ran different multi-GPU benchmarks on AMD and Intel systems and discovered that peer-to-peer is basically broken on the GeForce RTX 4090. Someone actually discussed this a little while back, and an Nvidia employee finally replied to the thread and stated this, quote, "Hi all, apologies for the delay. Feedback from engineering is that peer-to-peer is not supported on the 4090. Now, this is annoying because if you've actually followed the history of this all the way back, they even state it right here, even the they say RTX, but the GTX 10 series, so 1000 series Pascal GPUs actually offered peer-to-peer support over PCI Express. Then the 20 series actually offered it, but they did stop it during the RTX 30 series, and apparently they're continuing that with the 4000 series. Really, I'd argue all of this means that Nvidia is simply gimping the 4000 series cards, so you have good reason to spend a ton more money on things like the RTX 6000 Ada Edition GPU. And lastly for today, I actually have a really interesting story that comes from AMD discussing future tech during the ISSCC conference. During it, they discussed continuing to try and do double performance every 2.4 years. And one of the ways they plan to do that is very interesting. As you can see right here, they talk about future system-in-package architectures. And you can see they actually state advanced packaging enables maximally efficient integration of compute elements and memory. And it's that memory part that has me pretty excited. As you can see right here, they talk about tighter integration of compute and memory. So far, in one of their GPUs, I think it is, I'm fairly certain that they actually have 3D stacked HBM memory, but it's stacked still using an interposer to combine the DRAM with the compute cores. But as you can see right here, they actually plan to stack memory on top of the compute cores. That would make for less latency between them and also make them cheaper. But one thing that's really interesting is just the fact that it's clear that they're talking about stacked DRAM on top of chiplets. And they actually discuss some of the benefits of doing this. And effectively, we're talking much greater energy efficiency, could even get more performance out of it, but basically future CPUs could end up coming with memory in them to where you may not actually have to have separate memory modules. Of course, you could potentially have the option of buying memory so then you can have more, but this is definitely an interesting proposition. With that said, this will almost certainly come to things like servers first, but they may in fact come to say notebooks or maybe even desktop CPUs. Ultimately, whenever it comes to innovation, especially packaging innovation, AMD is killing it. And it's really interesting to see where they plan on taking this and how it can affect us. And let's just say it's pretty exciting. So while that does it for today, where do you think future chips and packaging is heading? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please subscribe. And as always, have a great day.